welcome back. Now, quite interesting how the show just ended on that strange note. Power went out on my entire block. Now, I doubt it that it was because I was talking about Jussie Smollett, but how synchronistic is it that when things get juicy, the universe throws you a curveball? So, let's go back to what I was referring to just before this very strange situation. Was the question that Steve Langenheim had actually asked in his question, which was regarding Cardi B. And he had specifically said, and I just want to go back to the quote here, Cardi B drugged, and for those that don't know, Cardi B is some sort of singer, rapper, 15-minute celebrity, a nobody, a thought, a whore, a disgusting human being. And you'll see why in a moment. But Steve Langenheim reminds us that Cardi B drugged and robbed men. And this is while she was working as a stripper. Yet she's still okay in Hollywood, and yes, it was the past, but still. No, doesn't matter that it was the past. But hashtag me too, right? I mean, doesn't that count? Or is this maybe something that won't be addressed because it doesn't fit the narrative that it's only bad white men that are causing these problems, right? I mean, look at Smollett's attackers. I mean, they were white nationalists. They were white supremacists, and apparently one of his lawyers is now saying that they may have used whiteface. But back to Cardi B. It's disgusting how this whore, this empty individual, is put up on a pedestal by social media, by the news media, by music media. Why? She has no talent. And most supposed artists out there today have no talent. They're basically just put in there. They've got a whole team of writers that works for them, and they put out a hit and they auto-tune them and make them look good and Photoshop them in spreads. But really, what are they doing? They're just another talking head that nobody should even be paying attention to. Anybody that even considers a celebrity's opinion to be a valid one is an idiot, to be quite honest. Thanks for joining us, man of 1,005 holes. Think of it this way, and many actors have come out and said this. They're liars. Johnny Depp actually said it quite well. And that's an interesting story we'll get into. Actually, before I go into that, I'm getting ahead of myself. But Johnny Depp said basically, I'm a liar. I'm not an actor. I basically play these roles because I'm lying about who I am. Now, Johnny Depp, there's a lot of issues there. Clearly, he's not getting the adrenochrome that he used to get, because if you take a look at his physical state right now, it's quite a sorry state. But when you're an elitist and you get to access these life extension treatments, you look very good when you're, say, Hillary's age, but if you get on the outs like Johnny Depp is, you look like you're about to die. But his wife has now been found out as the one that was basically attacking him and abusing him. There was a big kerfuffle in the past, and Johnny Depp apparently lost a lot of roles because he was labeled as this wife beater and stuff, and it's now come out that his wife, who is a character in the latest Aquaman movie, I believe his romantic interest, I haven't seen the movie, was the one that actually was physically beating him. He almost lost a finger because she threw a glass cup or a vase or something, and now there's a big call for her to sort of be removed from the Aquaman franchise. But it's a rarity that you see a male that's being defended after they've been slandered. But a female can do what Cardi B does. There's no repercussions. It's basically, it's actually encouraged. Like that's female empowerment, isn't it? It's disgusting, really. It's something that you totally see a clear double standard in, especially with individuals that the media is trying to put on a pedestal. Again, they find these certain individuals, no matter how shady their background or their past is, and they put them in these pedestals of, I guess, appreciation, where people just see them as this celebrity, and therefore not only is their opinion valid, more so than somebody who's actually, say, interested in politics rather than just saying what they're told to say, but they then go ahead and defend them. I mean, look at what happened with Smollett coming out, charges dropped, and people saying, oh, look at that. Well, take that, racist. Take that, bigots. You know, he was innocent. Well, there's no. There's nothing that says what happened with the dropping of charges of anything to do with innocence. In fact, Trump actually, due to a lot of outcry, it's not him deciding to do this arbitrarily, to ask the FBI to investigate why these charges were dropped. And this is actually going to lead to the revelation of these connections with Kamala Harris, with Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, and reveal a lot more about the character that Jussie Smollett really is. Now, Fox, that really disgusting, ridiculous cunt, the one that basically said that she had acted on behalf of Smollett, Kim Fox, to communicate with the Chicago Police Department. She actually came out and said publicly, and this is on the record, that because Jussie Smollett didn't have any previous convictions or interaction with the police, that was taken into consideration when they dropped the charges. Now, that's a bald-faced lie. A bald-faced lie. And I'll tell you why. Because in Chicago, Jussie Smollett, back in, I believe, 2005, was arrested for... it was a traffic infraction that led to more, because then he gave a false name, he gave a false story, and he was convicted of that crime, of several of those crimes. So when she came out and said that there was no previous convictions, and therefore that was the reason why, or one of the reasons why, that added to them dropping these 16 charges, you know that she is lying. Man of 1005 Hold chimes in the chat and says, artists nowadays are paid by record companies to sing, rap, dumbed down songs. Well, that's been going on for a long time. That's been going on for literally a long time. And not only that, but it's not just the record companies, but those of influence that allow them to, say, attend parties on Jeffrey Epstein's island or go to Bohemian Grove. The people that allow these artists to get there basically are on one-to-one speaking terms with them, and they tell them, you know what you should do? Go out and say these things. You know, well, we have your back. That's basically what Kamala Harris told Jussie Smollett. Go put this out. Do your thing. You're an actor. Make it happen so we can push our anti-lynching law in, and we got your back. No matter what, don't you worry how hot the heat gets. We got your back. And in a city as corrupt as Chicago, well, you can see they had his back. Now, I just want to remind everyone that you can always call in onto Skype if you wish to add something into the conversation. Maybe you have any questions. Maybe you disagree. Who knows? But you can always reach me on Skype at Devious Dave Rose. Now let's move on to discuss a few things here while we wait to see if we have anybody that wants to chime in on the Smollett or Mueller affairs. But we've got the whole problems that are going on right now with Brexit. As you may know, Britain actually had a referendum, an election that was specifically focused on whether or not they should leave the European Union. This was held actually on June 23rd, 2016. So 51.9% of the population supported leaving the European Union. If you have an understanding of the European Union, you understand that basically it is a massive cartel where you have unelected officials that are put into the position of the European Union Parliament, and they get to decide laws all across this landmass on people that they might not even have any connection to, and affect them economically, socially, and many other ways. And if you, again, examine how corrupt the EU is, you realize that, for example, powers like Germany really run the show. And if a country like Britain was to leave, or England, the UK, I should say, was to leave, they would actually be much more richer. They're actually subsidizing a lot of the poor countries in the European Union just so that they can say that they all belong to the same club. And it is really a drain, not only economically, but on the social systems of European countries, because you'll have somebody in Bulgaria that will end up in England. They'll never work. They'll be on welfare and they'll drain the public system. But Bulgaria, was able to impose that rule. Or maybe Germany thought that Bulgarians should go to England as opposed to Germany. And going on with Brexit is the fact that Elizabeth May, who was elected to sort of usher in that change, removing the UK from the European Union, she's basically proven herself to be an absolute traitor. She's basically betrayed all her countrymen and has done everything possible to either slow down, delay, or prevent Brexit from occurring. And when you start to really dig deep into who she is, you'll actually see, for example, that she met at a socialist youth camp back in the 70s with Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel right now is the Chancellor of Germany. And Angela Merkel actually grew up on the eastern side of the German Wall. So she was full part communist, and she worked with the secret police of Eastern Germany. So to see her pictured with Elizabeth May as young women goes to show that the elite connect to each other regardless of political party. Because in the end, it's the puppet masters behind them that are dictating how they operate. And you can see this with many, many politicians and individuals such as actors. But Angela Merkel has essentially even admitted that multiculturalism doesn't work, and yet Europe has opened its doors to economic migrants entirely from Africa and from some of the Middle East. But these people aren't going to be adding anything to the culture. They're, in fact, destroying it if you're any close to aware as to what's going on in Europe. And you may have heard, for example, of the Yellow Vests. And that's a group right now in France that is protesting basically for the past few months about well, publicly, what's being said about them is that they're hard right wing and extremists and stuff, and they initially were reported as complaining about the gas prices and so forth. But France, for example, is overwhelmed with socialist programs, and they open their doors totally to African migration. If you take a look at what Paris is now compared to even 10 years ago, it's a totally different world. Now, the image that I'm showing right now is just of a recent march that all the French are doing. And the country is just about ready to fall into civil war. The military's actually been told by Emmanuel Macron, who is the current president of France, who's essentially not only basically stated that he is a globalist, but he considers himself the Sun King. This is going back to Napoleon the 14th, where he was he called himself the sun god. He thought the whole world revolved around him, and at that point France was very powerful and they were making a lot of money with their colonies and stuff. So because of all that, he declared himself the Sun King. And Emmanuel Macron has done very similar things. He's declared himself Jupiter. This is also going back to sort of Roman, sort of fascistic beliefs and such. So he does consider himself sort of an emperor. And while all these protests are going on, he's skiing in the Alps and sipping on champagne with other elitists like George Soros. And France is at that point where they're about to break. And England isn't too far behind at all. But at least, strangely enough, the French have more courage than the British. England is cucked, as is France. But you don't see the protests that you're seeing right now in England that you do see in France. You don't see those protests going on, even though over 1,400 little girls have been trafficked, raped, and murdered by the rape gangs. Or should I say, the Islamic rape gangs of England. Well, of the United Kingdom. Because it happens in Scotland, and even the Irish are cucking themselves out and allowing the same thing to occur. And yet the French are the ones that are actually showing themselves to not be waving a white flag. Interesting. But it's also very telling, because France has always declared themselves to be pro-humanitarian and égalité, fraternité, and whatever the third one is, I don't even remember, with the French Revolution. And they've opened their doors to the world, and now you see Paris as a shithole. You see the country being drained of its resources and its companies by exploitative empires like China. And China right now is doing a big number on Africa. It's funny how it's declared that the white man was so bad for Africa. Wait till you get a load of the Chinese. They don't care. Look at how they treat their own people. They will pollute their own cities just to make a buck. What do you think they're going to do to people that they've openly declared to be as inferior, as uninvolved, as savages and stuff? Again, the Han Chinese consider themselves to be genetically superior to all other races on the planet. And China has at least 25, I think it's close to 40 different ethnicities within the country. Although they're all labeled as Chinese. But the Han Chinese consider themselves to be the superior ones, to be the elite class. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, we already see the effects in South Africa where farms are being repossessed by the government and conducting an actual genocide on white people. But all these farms fall along the lines of mineral resources that China has essentially purchased. So who's pushing the agenda in Africa? Look at all the situations around the world where China, with all their money, which is inflated, buys out a certain infrastructure resource of a country with the statement that they're going to help that country out. Well, as always, the country can't foot the bill, and that property now becomes part of China. It becomes a Chinese property. And they can do with it however they want. Tax it however we want, control it however they want, and hold that country now hostage. So China is attempting to do what the Anglo-American Empire did in the 18 and 1900s, is to establish themselves as a hegemony throughout the world and to exploit resources. But unlike other cultures, they would rather just exploit the earth, kill the population, and then leave, as opposed to leave some sort of regenerating system there that would allow for continual prosperity. There's a lot to say about China and their plans for world domination. At least that's what they would like to accomplish. But considering the fact that they still have to steal technology, it goes to show that they really aren't as advanced as they believe themselves to be. Also, you can judge a people by the way they treat animals. And I don't believe there's any other culture in the world that has more disdain for life than the Chinese. Now, a lot of that has to do with communist influence. When you remove anything spiritual and conduct these revisions of history by destroying ancient texts and information, the population is now molded into believing whatever it is that you are trying to tell them. And China is just such a great example of what is being attempted to be established throughout the rest of the world. But we see more sophisticated methods here in North America, for example. They don't need to have you at the barrel of a gun to convince you to support a certain interest, a certain activity. All they got to do is play on your emotions. And unfortunately, media has a big influence in that regard. So, for example, with Barack Obama, this individual, who is not the son of Barack Obama Sr., a known communist from Kenya, who somehow was able to study at American institutions. He's the son of Frank Marshall Davis, another well-known communist, especially in the Chicago area. All you really have to do is start to take a look at the facial features and understand that clearly he is not the son of the man that he claims to be. Frank Marshall Davis had a lot of involvement with Barack Obama while he was growing up. Took him to strip clubs, involved him in certain nefarious activities, including involvement with drugs and drinking underage and so forth. And his mother was a white woman called Ann Dunham, or Dunham. And she was a well-known communist as well, but more importantly, she's known as a CIA honeypot. Now, I would show you the images of her being caught acting as a honeypot. and I'll just go into that in a moment. But this video might be striked or whatever the case may be. So let me just say, look up Ann Dunham porn shoot. Because there's a honeypot, a CIA intelligence designation. She was working with the CIA, but as an intelligence designation is someone that is meant to attract the attention of a male for the purpose of compromising them. You can find that she did several porn shoots while working with the CIA, and the CIA has been, again, involved in multiple illicit activities, including pornography, and she was definitely part of it. She wasn't a very particular attractive woman, in my opinion, because when you take a look at those shots, you know, maybe a hand is better. I don't know. She's just definitely clearly honeypot material. Somebody who's going to use more of sexual wiles than attractive looks and influence to control somebody. Now, Obama's grandfather on his maternal side was also a communist, as was his grandmother. And it's funny because many people don't speak about this connection with Barack Obama. And as you can see, black father, white mother. But they call him the first black president. Well, under typical genetic rules and such, and typical definitions, which still aren't illegal, but you never know when they will become, and have been used for literally centuries before this culture of SJW insanity came into play. But Barack Obama is a mulatto. He's got a black parent and a white parent. Now, nowadays, that might be considered, oh, that's racist. Well, that's what's in the textbooks. You want to go change the textbooks? You can try, but you can't obfuscate, you can't confuse what reality is. So, Barack Obama, he's mixed race. He's not black, he's not white. He's mixed race. But yet, he's claimed to be the first black president. You have all these individuals that seem to invest their identity into him. Now, I've never done that with Donald Trump. I support a lot of the stuff that he does. I don't support a lot of the stuff that he does. I've been very critical of him, but I also love aspects of him. His bombastic nature, for example. The fact that he's willing to trigger the enemy media. There's a lot of stuff that I do like. There's a lot of stuff that I don't like. But I'm equal on those aspects and judge it accordingly. But Obama was considered even bigger than Jesus. He was considered this big savior. He was considered, again, this symbol for basically victimhood, a victimhood mentality. Sort of like the Black Panther movie, where a lot of people would talk about how, oh, Wakanda forever, like, you know, we was Kangs. Talking about how this somehow justifies their existence. A movie? A movie justifies their existence? I watched Blade. I love the Blade trilogy, for example. I love the character of Blade. Oh, yeah, I'm also not black. And Blade is, or I should say, Wesley Snipes is way blacker than Barack Obama. Does that make me not feel like I can enjoy the movie? Like I can't relate to Blade? No. Only a mentally ill moron would think that way. But looky here. Look at all the people that came out and supported Black Panther, the movie, on that basis. Not on the basis of the great cinematography, about the great storytelling, about the great special effects, or, you know, about how it continues to add to the Marvel Universe. No, it's because he's black and I feel marginalized. So I now feel like I'm justified. Like this fictional character in a movie gave me reason to live. Are you kidding me? So I mean, where do I start? Where do I start with that sort of insanity? It's this insanity that we see pervade throughout what is best described as identity politics. That's what it is. It's identity politics. It's not about saying, okay, well, this is a good, I don't know, this is a good policy because it benefits all these people and has a accountability for politicians, but also takes into consideration future growth and stuff. No, it's about us versus them. It's about identity politics and trying to create division, and also not address a lot of issues that people have, concerns that people have, in favor of inconvenient lies. Or convenient lies, I should say, as opposed to an inconvenient truth. So before I go on now, I just want to go back to the chat because I see Man of 1005 Hold says, and we're, as in referencing to the USA, still in debt with the Chinese because of stupid decisions, some by Obama. I think it's $1 trillion we owe them, so until otherwise the Chinese secretly owe Americans. Actually, China does not own the majority of American debt. It's the American taxpayers that actually hold that debt. The Chinese hold a portion of it, but it really isn't as much as would normally create the influence that they have right now, in the sense that they have more influence over American, or they had, I should say, more influence over American foreign policy, than their debt should have allowed them to. And that's because you've got a lot of Chinese agents within the American administration held over from the Obama administration, even all the way back to Bill Clinton. If you look into Chinagate, for example, that's how China was able to jump 20 years in technology advancement of their jets, stealth jets, of their missile systems, of their nuclear plants, of their nuclear weapons. Because Clinton basically opened the door for donations. Chinese were keen to oblige, and each party benefited. So the Chinese own some American debt, but not enough to basically make America fold. In fact, they don't own enough for America to do that, and America has still has enough economic clout in the world where they can break China's economy in literally minutes. And I'm not talking about cyber warfare. I'm talking about simple sells and puts and such on the stock market. China could be easily destroyed. They've inflated their market for decades. They are one of the few countries that are allowed to manipulate their currency, and nobody says a goddamn thing about it. But really, all they're doing is they're hiding their actual economic growth. They're building literally hundreds of these ghost cities in China, where it's a full city, buildings fully equipped, nobody's living there. And why? Because they need to show on paper that they still have economic growth. And that's how they manipulate the systems and the global economic system to give them favor and clout to try to bully the rest of the world into adhering to their economic policies. Like just the other day, they stopped buying all Canadian canola products. What they were buying was 40% of what Canada has in total. That's going to be a huge economic hit here in Canada. But for Canada, who's invested so much not only in allowing China to establish themselves domestically here with companies, but also infiltrate the government, there's no way out of that. We're going to be raped by them because of the system that was set up to allow this. We don't have the economic power that would allow us to create a trade war with them. America does, and is rightfully doing so. Give me a moment here to just take a Few sips of liquid. Got to stay hydrated. I'd like to thank all 8 people in the chat here tonight. Oh, all 9 people. And I remind you, if you've got any questions, feel free to add them in the chat or to give me a call on Skype at Devious Dave Rose. So let's move on, because we've covered Smollett, we've covered Mueller, we've covered the Brexit trouble situation, we've covered Cardi B and her raping ways, covered China and some of the debt. But that's another thing, though, is in regards to debt, is who's this money going to? I mean, consider that. All this money that America's indebted to, who's it going to? And who's benefiting? Because after all, it's a fiat money system. It's basically, right now, because America is not on a gold system, although it's being talked about returning to that, which is extremely intelligent, nothing's backing the money. So it's all toilet paper. The only reason why America still has the clout that it has is because the petrodollar, where petroleum is still connected to the dollar, and for example, countries like Saudi Arabia need to deal in American dollar for them to be able to sell their oil and stuff. There's a lot of deep connections when it comes to the use of dollar, but this is usury in the end. And you just have to take a look at banks like the one in the City of London that have enough gold and clout to essentially influence countries' operations just by lowering their credit level. Now back to the chat, we've got that Barracoda. Says, hey Dave, hope you're doing good. Thank you very much. I hope your Friday's doing well and that you're ready for the weekend and enjoying the show. Steve Langenheim chimes in, says, do you think there are more legit shootings than staged or vice versa? Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. I think it's time for me to bring up some graphics here, because when you bring up a good topic that I have my collection of memes prepped and ready to go, I can tell you unequivocally that the majority of shootings are not legit. Okay? Most of them are planned, but they're planned in a way so that connections to why they occurred are very difficult to come across. And very often than not, you find that these individuals are registered Democrats, and almost always are on some sort of psychotropic drug. Now I'm going to put one particular graphic up here right now, and I'm going to put a few more up as well. But these shootings, and we're actually just about a little bit shy of a month coming up to the 20th anniversary of the Columbine shootings. And that is something that people need to keep into consideration, not just for the fact that it was one of the turning points when it came to the definition of school shootings, but also because since it took place on April 20th, a date that the elite have valued for a long time, but that the leftist media seem to paint as connection to the birth of Adolf Hitler, when in fact many of the individuals that have conducted shootings on April 20th, not just the Columbine shooters, were anti-Hitler and anti-Nazi. So let's quickly go through some of these images here. Mentally unstable liberal entities. You also start to see a lot when it comes to their eyes. Look at the eyes. There's always something in the eyes. In all these cases that you can see presented to you were hoaxes. I'm not going to allege that. I'm going to state that unequivocally. The evidence is overwhelming. Especially when you've got individuals that are under the control of psychotropic drugs, are in and out of psychological mental institutions, strangely are always registered Democrats or related to registered Democrats, and have access to firearms that they would not normally have access to. There's the guy second left, top left, second from the top left. Can't remember his name, but he was a military officer and he did have access to firearms. So there are a few exceptions in that regard, because when you are part of a psychological program for mind control, which is what each and every one of these individuals fits in with regards to their MO, with their details of their crimes, it's very clear. This is basically Project Monarch. This is an evolution from there to whatever you want to call it, Project MKUltra, and there's so many other names, Manchurian Candidates. These are individuals that are controlled in many different ways to undertake what's necessary to push an agenda. Let me go back to a few more images here. Let's take a look at this one. Oh, strange that nobody seems to talk about this one. And this also goes back to the memory hole. And this is actually where reading comes into play. Some people seem to have an adverse reaction, like an allergic reaction when it comes to actually staying educated and reading. But when it comes to ensuring you don't get pushed down the memory hole along with these stories, you got to keep your eyes open for this. Let's go through this list. 2016, Democrat kills 49 in Orlando. His father actually appeared at a Hillary Clinton political campaign, was allowed to speak, made videos, well connected to the Democrat Party. 2015, a Democrat kills 12 in San Bernardino. There's actually 2 of them there, Islamic terrorists, just like in Orlando. 2013, Democrat, that was the guy that actually had access to weapons that I just previously alluded to, kills 12 at a Navy shipyard, also Islamic. Democrat in 2012 kills 26 in Sandy Hook School. Well, I'm going to call that questionable, but we do have that individual who, I can't remember his name. God damn it. Let me just quickly look this up here. I don't like forgetting people's names. Adam Lanza. Adam Lanza. I didn't even have to look it up. It just came to me. Adam Lanza. Well, supposed Democrat, although he was underage, but his mother was a Democrat, very Democratic family. They stated that they had access to weapons in the house. Very questionable on how they acquired them. 2012, Democrat kills 7 in Minnesota. I can't remember that one. 2011, Democrat kills 12 in Aurora movie theater. He was a Democrat. That was proven. Democrat shoots Gabby Gifford, kills 12 in Arizona. That actually brought out an immediate call for gun control. Virginia Tech, that Chinese kid, registered Democrat. Democrat kills 7 at Lockheed Martin plant in 2003. And you can read the rest of that because, again, it's Democrat, it's Democrat, it's Democrat, it's Democrat, and none of them are ever members of the NRA. Strange. Now, I'm not going to come out and say I support the NRA 100%. I have a lot of issues with them. I think they do collude with a lot of anti-gun groups, and that's on purpose. They're a compromised organization. So they will do things to try to antagonize as opposed to bring proper discussion to firearm ownership and stuff. So there is a problem with the NRA. But that being said, they are one of the few groups that do sort of advocate ownership, gun ownership and stuff. And you have to consider that there is some value to them. Although, again, being compromised does create a disservice to those that actually do value the Second Amendment and their ability to defend themselves. So let's see if I've got another image to share with you guys tonight. I think I do. Oh, there we go. Here's another one. And actually it builds quite well on what I was just saying. Because when a Democrat asks, why do Americans need guns? Why do Americans need guns? Apologies. I've been talking so much today that my mouth doesn't seem to be able to operate. All of these shooters were registered Democrats. So basically the answer is to protect yourself against Democrats who have actual guns. And many of these actually had them illegally. As I mentioned, the one at Fort Hood, as you can see, he's continued his evolution to the true Islamicist that he is. He was able to acquire guns, his firearms legally, at least through his position. The Hollywood shooter, I believe, may have had a legal firearm. Hollywood being in California, California does have some strict laws, so sometimes it does come out that rules were bent or broken, especially when it comes to mind control victims, to allow these individuals to acquire a firearm, just like Adam Lanza at Sandy Hook. Also the Aurora shooter. And even, well, the Virginia Tech guy, many people don't know that he served in the Marines. And many of the photos that are actually shown of them, they're manipulated via Photoshop. The backgrounds are actually manipulated. They're not real. Could be a composite, could be a double in the sense that an individual took up the role, looks similar, and this individual never existed in the first place. We have to understand that a lot of the identities that are created by the deep state, they don't exist. They're not real. These people basically are composites of other images. They get someone that looks like them, they give them the operation to do, and as soon as the operation is done, that particular individual is whisked off to another post in the world where they're going to assume another identity, take up another look, and plastic surgery is used quite often when it comes to people that work as spies. And this individual now no longer looks like they did before, and they carry on doing another operation around the world. Nobody very much speaks about how the Columbine shooters basically were under massive amounts of pharmaceutical drugs and how they had been in counseling for a long time. And also the training that they were able to acquire isn't normally something that you would be able to acquire in 1999 using the internet or by attending a gun range, especially in Colorado, which is a fairly democratic state. There's a lot of questions that people should have when it comes to mass shootings. Because when you start to take a look at the actual statistics, they don't match up with what we're being presented with. It's clear that there's a narrative being pushed, not just by certain elements of the government, not just by certain activist groups like, say, the Anti-Defamation League, like the Southern Poverty. I can't remember their exact name. They're really just a fucking Nazi group, but I call them Nazis because they're leftists. That's what a National Socialist is. The Southern Poverty Law Center. Groups that are basically declaring... It's an organization declaring all sorts of groups, including, say, like the Proud Boys. And I was never a fan of the Proud Boys at all, as white supremacists. If you take a look at who's in the Proud Boys, you've got like every single ethnicity. So to call them white supremacists, it bears clear what these particular organizations are trying to convey. And it's not just these activist groups, it's the newspapers. They'll say, in Hungary, a bunch of right-wing people staged a protest against immigrants. When, in fact, the truth is, in Hungary, a bunch of patriots showed their love for their country and for the rule of law to demonstrate, not protest. What do they protest for? They're demonstrating in support of their government's decision to appreciate them first, to protect them first as citizens over anybody else, over any foreigner that might go into their country. The EU, the UN, all these activist groups, shame on you, Hungary. You must be Islamophobes. You must be racist. You must be bigots. It totally lays bare what they're trying to do. There's no problem wrong for a group, especially an ethnic group, to be proud of themselves and to try to protect their culture. But if you do so, you will incur the wrath of all these groups that will try to shame you into thinking that you're wrong for trying to protect your own people. Now, this is something I'm actually going to be speaking about in an episode that's going to be coming up. There's a few episodes I'm going to be having to put out over the next few days because there's just been so much news, so much information that needs to come out. I will need to put a few live shows out over the next few days, over this weekend, just to get to all the information. But in regards to the current social situation, where people, say in Hungary or Poland, are attempted to be shamed by these clearly globalist organizations that just want to have more economic control, that they're racist. Why do you think Trump won back in 2016? When you get called racist enough, and even if you're on the, or were on the left, these people are going to push you to such an extent that eventually they're going to create the enemy that they never wanted. So let me quickly show this image, which relates to what I'm referring to right now. It needs to be understood, especially by people on the left and liberals, that it wasn't the right that dragged you towards the right. It was the left that pushed you to the right. They're the ones that shifted the goalpost. They're the ones that shifted the cultural divide. Look at this graphic. Look at how it starts in 94, where there seems to be a lot more consensus in the middle. A lot more mixed opinions that could reach an agreement, a consensus. And yet as time goes on, the political divide gets further and further away. But if you look at it, you see that it's the left that's doing that, not the right. It's the left that's going so extreme that people who were once liberals are now automatically considered conservatives because the left shifted to the left. Not because you changed your opinions, if you're a classic liberal. Not because you decided to, reconsider what you thought before. You were always the same person you were before. You never shifted. It's the left that shifted. And this is further accelerated when you have people on the left, on the extreme left, calling even a former classic liberal a racist. How do you expect to bring consensus? You're just creating a further divide. So when people try to tell you that it's the right that created the political current division that exists in America or even in the West, tell them that they're morons and that they probably don't deserve a right to vote. Because it really just takes two brain cells to examine the information that's available everywhere to realize that this is in fact the case. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any problems with the right-wing or conservative side of American politics. There's a lot of globalists that are still residing within the Republican Party, and especially a lot of rhinos, Republican in name only. But when any butthurt NPC SJW automaton tries to throw this bullshit lies at you that, it's the party switched in the 60s, the Republicans were good and then they became evil racists in the 60s, or that the left has always been tolerant and it's the right that's radicalizing people. You can now tell them that they're full of bullshit, and in fact that their opinion has no value. And yeah, that might bother a lot of people, but it's only emotionally weak people that are bothered by the truth. The facts back up what I'm saying, and I'm not the only one that says these sorts of things. But they're there if you want to look them up. Now, before we go on, I just want to see if anyone has any questions in the chat or wants to give me a call on Skype. Seems like it's a little bit of a quiet night tonight. I did want to, again, like I said, get this information out so at least I could address what others had asked me to address, as well as topics that I had wanted to speak about for a while, but unfortunately, due to my schedule, didn't allow me to do so. But before we move on, what I actually want to do right now is I want to play a little sound clip for you. This sound clip actually happened last night at a rally that President Trump held. And I think you're going to like this. So let me just play it for you. And maybe I'll get some interaction from those in the chat.
The Democrats have to now decide whether they will continue defrauding the public with ridiculous bullshit.
Let me play that again for you.
The Democrats have to now decide whether they will continue defrauding the public with ridiculous bullshit.
Now, I want to be very clear, especially to those of the moron mentality, those that are imbeciles and idiots, morons and mental midgets that might somehow come upon this video. It doesn't matter how butthurt you get about the fact that the President of the United States used a curse word. This individual goes to prove why so many people love him and why he got elected in the first place. He is not the typical politician. He is willing to say what needs to be said. And personally, I don't want a politician that's just going to sugarcoat things, especially when it comes to the urgent times that we are currently in. I want a politician that speaks the truth, that wipes his ass with the opinions of people that are less than garbage and is willing to be honest. Now, like I said, I've got my issues with Trump, but the fact that he is willing to speak such a truth where he's willing to curse, where many would throw up their arms and clutch their pearls and say, somebody of that position shouldn't curse. I'll just remind them to look at the national debt. Look at the crime statistics. Look at the drug overdoses. Look at the situation on the southern border. And go fuck yourself. Because this is what this world needs. It needs people that are willing to break away from convention. Break away from this politically correct bullshit. And say what needs to be said. And it doesn't matter about this high position. It's people like John Kerry and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi who care about these sorts of meaningless little things. They would rather that nobody curse and everyone agree upon opening the border and indebting the country even more and not accepting you're not upsetting transgenders for telling them they're mentally ill. But Trump comes out and calls it ridiculous bullshit. And the SJWs, the leftists, the NPCs, they go nuts. They can't. It doesn't compute. Error. They can't accept the fact that their eternal enemy, the one that lives rent-free in their minds, has actually cursed. Although these are the people that are actually saying, fuck Trump, he should die in Twitter. No, but when he says it, the world comes apart. These are the people that somehow have been decided should be allowed to vote. Think about that for a second. They make a big deal about mentally ill individuals owning firearms. What about mentally ill individuals voting? How the fuck do you think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the donkey face of Brooklyn, got elected? Moron mentality. It's that boulevard brilliance. That road rationale. The idea that somehow you know better because you were told to know better. That's how they operate. It's an endless computational loop. I know better because I was told better. I was told to think that. And I was told to think that because that's what I said. And it goes on in an endless loop. These people are your enemies. These people would rather see your country burn than just accept the fact that they're the ones in the wrong. And they'll call for violence, even to their own family members, as long as they get that personal affirmation that they stood up to the orange bad man. After all, I can sit behind my computer screen and type on Twitter, "Fuck you, Donald Trump. I'm gonna resist." And yet, you let your own, if you really valued the Democrat Party, you wouldn't have allowed it to be destroyed from the inside as it has been done. Think about that also for a second. All these people that are coming out and defending all these Democratic presidential potentials and shitting on anybody that doesn't agree with them, whether Republican or not. Well, I've got some internet issue here. Let me just see what's going on. Oh, good. There was some sort of break. Oh, it looks like the chat didn't even update. Oh, fuck you, YouTube. Fuck you, Shlomo. All right, let's go to the chat. I can't even remember what I was talking about, but that pisses me off. Today's been a challenge since we're starting part 2. Darkroom 8.5. Since the power magically went off. Stephen Langheim says, is it always MK Ultra with the stage shooters or other stuff too? Well, it is other stuff. There are some times where it is an individual that is essentially set up to allow for the thing to occur. Look at the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, where the bomber, the one who was set up to be the bomber, was provided with all the elements by the FBI. He was told it was going to be a trial. He suspected he was being set up. He recorded the information, proved that it was basically actual bomb material as opposed to a dud. He moved it to a different location so that it wouldn't bring down the structural sort of barrier and prevented the actual collapse of the World Trade Center in 1993. So there are times where there are actual people that do want to commit these crimes that are basically set up and allowed and provided the resources necessary by the authorities, by the actual authorities who want to see this event occur so that they can then push their political agendas. We got Man of 1005 Holt says, great question. I can't remember which one that was. Maybe he was referring to Steve. Steve Langenheim, drugs too. I mean, yeah, drugs very often are involved. When it comes to any sort of mind control project, drugs are definitely involved, especially pharmaceutical drugs that are over the counter or prescribed, and they're taken in combination with supposed sessions with a psychologist. And those, really what's going on in those sessions is they're being basically programmed. And those drugs are being utilized to ensure that. We got the Barracuda says, yeah, dude, I'm good. Work 8 hours tomorrow, and then off Sunday, I'm at work listening to the show and going on lunch. Hey, good for you, man. Hope you have a good lunch. I'm a big fan of sandwiches myself. Steve Langenheim says, how can Trump not win 2020? There's nobody you can trust enough to take over right now. Well, despite that, unfortunately, there's been a lot of, especially with the midterms, for example, there was actually a lot of voter manipulation and corruption and such. So basically, the deep state still has a lot of power when it comes to elections, and they're still very capable of actually having somebody just put a few different lines of code in, and there you go. You've got a winner in the district, in that district. Now, there's groups like Project Veritas, for example, that are actually exposing the crime that's going on right now. And really, it's actually, if you look at it, it's sedition. Like, these are high crimes we're talking about. This is treason. Anybody that's convicted of this, and technically under times of war, which, if you really want to be honest, we are, like, America is under war right now. It's been under that for most of its existence. You can basically just, you don't need a trial. You've got the proof, you've got the individual, execution, and you move on. That's what happens under times of war. Under treason, boom, done. That's it. So that could technically be applied in this situation as well. That would cause some problems with a lot of protesters, but seen as the Department of Homeland Security a few years ago bought, I think it was 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition, I think that you'll be able to take care of all the protesting leftists on the street and have a nice leftover of ammunition for any potential southern caravan invasion, if you know what I'm saying. So back to the chat. Yeah, it is rigged, Stephen Langenheim. A lot of it is rigged. I mean, the election fraud that happened even in 2016 when Trump won was incredible. The fact that there's just this feeling, this overwhelming feeling of a desire for change in the United States is what got Donald Trump elected. Despite the fact that the deep state cheated so deeply in 2016, flipping all these votes, it was so overwhelming that people came out and voted for Trump. It actually overwhelmed the cheating that the deep state tried to do. So they, like, if they never even got involved, most of the country would have been red. Most of it. Obviously, there's certain areas in the country that are illegal strongholds. But the fact is, if illegals weren't allowed to vote, if a lot of these rules were basically adhered to, Hillary wouldn't have even been a blip on the radar. Trump would have won almost in the entire country. And I warn you, Americans, the Democrats are trying to get rid of the Electoral College. That's what prevents the whole country from being at the beck and call of New York, Democrat city, LA, Democrat city, Florida, Miami, basically, Florida's Democrat city, Houston, Democrat city, or Austin. So again, like, so much infiltration there. Portland, Democrat city. Boston, Democrat city. If it wasn't for the Electoral College, these cities would basically dictate how the country would work. And you'd never get any other party than the Democrats ever again. Why? Because they hand out money to the mentally weak, and they convince them to continue to vote for them. And when you've got illegals that are living in a country that don't have any specific job officially, you can ship them to multiple voting centers and have them vote, because after all, voter ID is illegal, or is racist, isn't it? Except for the fact that Hispanic isn't a race. And again, somebody who is of Hispanic heritage, like myself, considering the fact that English isn't even my first language, how fucking dare you try to use the racism card in this? As I spoke about earlier, Mexican isn't a race. It's actually a combination primarily of mestizo, another term that now is trying to be outlawed, although it's perfectly acceptable. Well, it is the mestizo. It's basically a combination of both the native and a Spanish conquistador mixing. So that's the mestizo. That's the mix. That's not a race. That's a mixed race. Just like Barack Obama isn't black, Mexicans aren't a race. They're not even full natives either, which in the old terms would be called the red man. But now, oh, that's racist. So being against immigration is not racist. Calling out the bullshit of those in Hispanic countries that are trying to invade America, not racist. Trying to be against illegals that are undercutting hardworking Americans that are trying to actually work legitimately, that's not racist. And I challenge anybody to a debate on that, because it seems very clear that it's just a dog whistle, as I spoke about earlier. As soon as you say somebody's racist, oh, well, I must be a bad person. I've got to be quiet. I can't say anything. So, clearly that's something that will sorry, I apologize. I'm going to call here. What the fuck? Yeah, dog whistle. Racism. Oh, you're bad. And nobody wants to even examine what is race. And if you're a mixed race, how is that racism if you're not even defining that race? And again, how can you define an ethnicity or a culture and call it racism? This is common sense. This is logic. But for leftists, anything that's different, anything that is not the norm, is considered a special pet. And that's what the Democrats view Hispanics, blacks, Asians. They're their pets. Little pets. You're going to vote for what we tell you. We're going to give you the handouts. But hey, as soon as we get a new victim, hey, the trannies are coming. Okay, blacks, you're no longer the victim we want. We want the trannies. What happens to you? You get pushed aside and a new victim comes in. They're the ones that get the handouts and, well, you've served your purpose and now you're in the gutter. And that's what we're seeing right now with the Democratic Party. They've used the black people as much as they could. Now they've moved on to the Hispanics. And they're also moving on to the transgenders and the LGBTQ HPXV 5.275 and the rest of the victims that want to declare themselves as being vulnerable to reality. Now, before I move on, I'm going to, again, imbibe in a little bit of beer, wet the whistle, and ensure I'm hydrated. Give an opportunity for those in the chat to maybe add a few things that they might be thinking, or perhaps we might have one of those rare Skype calls that we sometimes have here. So now we got Steve Langenheim in the chat says, I'm worried whoever is after Trump will get easily manipulated or already manipulated. Well, Donald Trump Jr., I believe, actually just announced the other day that he is considering a 2024 run. So that sort of gives an indication that it's almost guaranteed that Trump will run in 2020, which even without that, you can sort of assume that that would be the case. Which would be interesting because you could technically have a Trump dynasty in the White House potentially for the next few decades, to be honest. I'll tell you why. Trump wins 2020. He goes to 2024. Well, he can't run anymore, right? His daughter, who I'm not a fan of at all, Ivanka Trump, he's got another one, which they don't talk about too much because there's been drug issues and stuff like that. Ivanka's indicated she might potentially run for office, and I don't like the idea that, again, you've got a woman, and it's not that a woman is not capable of ruling or running a country. It's that, look, it's a woman. Then you've got women now saying, well, I've got to vote for her. It doesn't matter what her platform is. It doesn't matter about her connections to Israel through her husband. It doesn't matter about her connections to Chinese slave labor through her clothing company. She's a woman, and I got to support her. You saw the same thing with fucking Hillary Clinton, with Elizabeth Warren, with Kamala Harris. There's that potential that might happen. There's also the fact that Donald Trump Jr., again, has indicated that he may run. Maybe 2024, maybe even 2 terms to 2028. Well, actually, 2024 to 2028, 2028 to 2032. By that point, maybe Barron Trump will run. This is like the Kennedy dynasty, like to the next level. I wouldn't count them out. There's, a lot of complications that could occur from this. And I'm not a fan of hereditary sort of rulerships. I mean, you see that with North Korea, right? You got father, son, and continued onwards ruling in power. That can lead to potential problems. It can also sort of allow for an actual policy to take place and take effect. Because, again, think of it this way. You can't just undo 8 years worth of Obamanomics on America in 2 years. You can't. And, I mean, the fact that Trump has been able to increase GDP by as much as he did, reduce unemployment as much as he did, to start to reel in rogue nations like North Korea. Trump has accomplished so much in the years that he's come into power, more than Obama did. And you can't, and even though he's progressed quite a lot, you can't expect him to be able to flip a switch and just undo everything that Barack Obama or even George Bush and Bill Clinton did. It's going to take time. And these sorts of things require actually a lot of foresight and a lot of planning. And unfortunately, when it comes to working in government, things do take a lot of time to change sometimes. So that needs to be considered when it comes to all the work that Trump is currently doing. But I'm not a fan of Ivanka, as I mentioned earlier, nor am I a fan of Jared Kushner, who is her husband. His connections to Israel are extremely concerning, and the influence that Israel is currently exerting over the White House is also extremely concerning. Speaking of Israel, it seems a lot of countries are coming out and not too on board with the whole idea of approving Israel's claim to the Golan Heights. In fact, many countries, including Canada, are basically saying Israel has no claim to the Golan Heights whatsoever. Now, if you remember what I spoke about 2 episodes back on episode 6, I believe it was 6, Censored, I spoke about how the New Zealand instance, sorry, it was episode 5, Censored. The New Zealand event, the shooting in Christchurch, was spoken about by many individuals in the intelligence industry, specifically about how it was an attempt to distract from Israel's actions in the Mideast against Syria and in the Golan Heights. So, despite the fact that the operation, and that's what it was in New Zealand, was a success, because now they're basically forcing their police officers to wear hijabs in public, even though the country is a Christian nation, remove Jesus and the crucifix from the parliament, and yet force the Muslim call to prayer onto people, goes to show that essentially New Zealand has chosen their fate. But the operation was a success because that was the whole point. There's already been one death when it comes to the confiscation of firearms in New Zealand, something that they just totally swept in through the parliament, utilizing the travesty of the supposed mosque shooting, or should I say mosque shootings. But hey, down the memory hole it goes. You know, there was 4 or 5 mosques that were supposedly attacked, multiple individuals that were cited and photographed. No, down the memory hole it goes. There was only one shooter. There was only one mosque. There was only one story. It was a white nationalist. Although he was supposedly from Australia, although his photograph seems to be manipulated, although he's now been connected to the Mossad as an agent. So the story unravels very quickly, very easily, when you start to take a look at the details that are out there. When you start to follow the money. Because you might be a good spy, but the banksters are greedy, and they write everything down. And that is their biggest weakness, because their greed allows people like you and I to track their movements, to see who is benefiting, who is under whose control, and what the narrative will then become. I think it's very easy. Once you start to see these patterns, it's very easy to start to analyze and determine what direction we're going into. So the Smollett thing, for example, I immediately knew that that was an attempt to try to create yet another narrative that black people are constantly being attacked in America. False. That gay people are constantly being bashed in America because they're gay. False. That Trump supporters are the biggest racist on the planet. False. And it becomes so simple, so easy to be able to see these things for what they are, to see beyond the veil, to see truth in its pure form. Sometimes truth is ugly, but if you don't have the courage to actually stare at it, you'll never know exactly what it is. We got Steve C's Drama and Archives in the chat saying yo, and I'll say yo back to you. Thanks for joining us here tonight on this Friday, March 29th. We are almost into April. And the times, they are changing. Now, before we move on, I'm just going to see if I can pull up another graphic here for you. And while I do so, I'll encourage anyone to ask any questions in the chat they might see fit, or to give me a call on Skype if you want to add any more to the conversation. There's a lot I could talk about, but these are just the latest stories that have occurred over the last couple of weeks. Just going to pull up some more information here I wanted to share with you tonight. Oh, another thing is, I did mention this previously, but got all these individuals that are running for the presidency of the United States in the, or I should say the Democratic nominations, so that they can become in the running for the presidency of the United States. And obviously you've got Bernie Sanders, who is still sticking around despite the fact that many people have woken up to the idiot and socialist moron that he actually is. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people, especially younger people, who have never bothered to read a book, never bothered to pay attention in history class, to realize that it's all been done before. What he is saying, what he is proposing, has been done before. And it is a pathetic attempt to pull the wool over people's eyes that have access to the internet. You cannot be this stupid in this day and age. It's an excuse. With access to the information that we have right now, with the ability to look into the past, to know how countries that did deal with socialism resolve and how they came to be, and how they may have disevolved, it's very clear that this not only won't work in America, it won't work in the world. And yet, these bleeding heart idiots, whether it be 16 or 60, still believe that socialism is an option. It's beyond pathetic. The information's there. It's the same, for example, with Justin Trudeau. He was elected into power, and people already knew the type of person he was. And yet, they still elected him anyways. Why? Because of pleasantries, because of what he said. And now we're dealing with massive taxes, no economic growth, and basically an invasion of our country by third world economic migrants that are going to stay on these social services until they die. We've been infiltrated. Western culture has been infiltrated by the Marxists. This is not some sort of fantasy of the 1950s of the Red Invasion. When Lano's in true, it's come to pass, and we're there right now. And we have limited time to fix this problem. Remember, if Hillary Clinton had been elected, we'd already be in nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine or Syria. We'd probably be in a nuclear war with Iran as well because of Israel. That really should hit home for a lot of people and should make a lot of individuals that may have considered Hillary or Bernie Sanders an option, or even Jill Stein, should make them hang their heads in shame for their idiocy and their stupidity. Again, if you bothered to take your head out of your ass and read, you'd be able to easily realize that these people don't give a fuck about you. And they're going to use you, abuse you, and discard you at the first chance. But people keep voting for them. Why? Well, that's a complicated topic that I will be talking about in the near future. That's actually going to be probably tomorrow's episode. So I'd encourage you to check that out, because we're going to be diving deep into the mindset of these individuals. Now let's go back to the chat here. We've got Steve Langenheim saying, how is Trump able to fight the deep state? I thought nobody can mess with them. Does Trump have something on them since his business passed? Okay, well, we're going to have to dig deep, because this is something that although I have discussed in the past, it isn't something that really is very known, in the sense that you got to consider it this way. Trump didn't need to become president. In fact, any rational human would probably not want to become president because of the fact that they'd be losing a lot of power. The president of the United States isn't the most powerful position on the planet, but it does hold a lot of power. The guy could have easily just spent, his days enjoying his business. And again, there's nothing wrong with using business tax loopholes, for example, for tax avoidance. Avoidance is not illegal because you're just using the system against itself. It's not your fault the system is set up stupid. That's every business person does that. Everyone. And it's actually set up on purpose. Trump wouldn't be spending this time where he could be making billions of dollars, keeping his brand up, making him look like he's 100%, and people not hating on him and stuff. But he chose to run for the president. And remember, people only started calling him a racist when he started to run for president. You may remember that there was many photos of him taken where he was with, say, who do we got here? Al Sharpton. Who's the other one? Who's the other race baiter? There's been a lot of people that he's been on friendly terms with or actual friends with. Mike Tyson, for example. There's so many different people that he's been involved with. Don King. 50 Cent. I mean, there's so many people that he's been involved with, and he's clearly Snoop Dogg, at least until he ran for president. All these people were easily associating with them. They had no problems with. They loved them. I mean, look this up actually on YouTube. Look for Trump shout out rappers, and you're gonna find like all these songs, like 50 different songs that up until 2016 people were making because they wanted to be like Trump. Even Barack Obama said the American dream is to be like Donald Trump. But as soon as he runs for the president, he becomes a racist, right? Well, going back to what Steve Langenheim said. And I'd follow this basically from the beginning, even before the beginning. I remember, and it's vivid, that when the whole Obama administration was winding down, actually it was even before then, but basically looking towards the end of the Barack Obama legacy or lack of legacy, and the movement towards having to pick a new president and so forth, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if Donald Trump ran? Now, how synchronistic it was. Because then he started to come out publicly and sort of hint that that was the direction he was going in. Now, it was a little bit before he announced his candidacy where he actually traveled to Scotland. And he went to one of his golf courses. And he actually was there for a few days, and not much was reported in the news. At that point, when I was made aware of that information, I said, this is it. This is it right here. Something is happening. He's making his decision. He's probably going to run for president, but more importantly, Why is he meeting in Scotland? Why is he there? Why is he away from prying eyes from the deep state? Like, who is he meeting with here? Now, a few days later, he announced he's running for president. If you dig deep into a lot of the background information, it does appear that the military intelligence apparatus of the United States came to Donald Trump and said, "We want you to run. We need you to help. We need your help to take back the country. We've got your back. Don't worry about your family. Don't worry about yourself. If anyone messes with you, they're taken care of." Now, military intelligence is different from the absolute and total corruption that is the CIA, the NSA, and a few other three-letter alphabet soup organizations. Okay? They're one of the groups that is probably the least compromised, if at all. A lot of checks and balances, but more so a lot of patriots. So we even know that back in 1962, JFK said, "I want to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces." Okay? CIA founded in 1947. 47 to 62. By that point, they'd already shown themselves to be total tools of the globalists, of the Marxists that were infiltrating the American system, and that were basically just running amok when it came to assassinations, invasions like the Bay of Pigs. And even JFK realized it. And that's probably one of the main reasons he was eliminated, because the CIA is a big key when it comes to the deep state. Military intelligence went to Trump and said, "We got you covered. You run. You're protected. Don't worry about potential assassinations. We're well involved. We've been planning for this for a long time." And the research does seem to sort of back that up, that the good people have been waiting for this opportunity to try to take back the country. And it does seem to be that way. There's a lot of things that were attempted to be done against Donald Trump, including attempts on his life that haven't been highly reported by the media, obviously, because the media is fake news trying to pull their bullshit. But there's been actual, at least from my recollection, 7 different attempts on Donald Trump's life since he became president. Nobody wants to talk about it. But it seems to be military intelligence is well aware of this. And there are more even beyond that. There is clearly a patriot movement in the United States that is separate from the deep state, that is well prepared for this sort of inevitability. And in the end, they're the ones who are going to survive, not the deep state. Militias are a very small portion of this. But if you really want to take a look at the stats, the patriots in the government and the militias alone will be able to retake control of the country if worse comes to worse and there is a civil war. Now let me take a drink because I've been speaking a fair bit. And yes, please call in. Somebody, share your opinions. Gotta give me at least a little bit of a break to just not speak for a moment and just catch my breath. Whew. And it digs so deep. It digs so deep. There's so much information I could talk about. And the problem is that I don't even know where to start sometimes, because the octopus has its tentacles almost everywhere. It's almost all connected. And it all leads back to this global elite that wishes to take control of the planet utilizing control, whether it be mental control, whether it be social control, economic control. They just want control. And what's better than dividing people and still controlling them? That's the whole purpose. That's the whole point. It's all about control. So we've covered quite a few topics here tonight. Not sure if there's anything else that anybody would like me to cover. I wanted to at least cover the most recent happenings with the Smollett Hoax. Again, make sure to look at American Renaissance on the internet to find the map of all the fake hate crime hoaxes that are going on, and look at the details of exactly how pathetic these individuals are, how easy it is to be able to identify a fake hate crime. Very often than not, you can take a look at the way that a swastika is drawn, and you can say that's clearly not a Nazi. They don't even know how to draw that thing. And that's immediate indication that somebody wants to be a victim. So I guess we're not going to get any other questions tonight, which is perfectly fine. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in the news today that I'd like to cover. There's always a lot of stuff that happens in the news. Also, just reading a few headlines here. See if I can recollect anything that I may have forgotten. As always, I do recommend, if you want to learn a little more than what's going on, check out 4chan.org/poll, P-O-L. And you may learn a few things that the mainstream news media would prefer that you don't know. Breitbart isn't a bad website, although they have their problems, they have their biases. But they do examine a few things that are kind of interesting. And despite the fact that it is a echo chamber, a place like Reddit/The Donald is also an interesting place to pick up some information. It is a little bit subdued there, and it is an echo chamber, but sometimes you can find some interesting information that is listed. All right, since that seems to be the end of our list of news here, I do want to thank those that did join us here tonight, those that are still with us here tonight, and I do appreciate the interaction that we had here tonight. For those that were asking questions or making statements in the chat, be sure to join me tomorrow as I will dig even deeper into the topic of intelligence, reason, and logic. And on Sunday, probably one of our most controversial topics, a topic that many people, frankly, are too cowardly to discuss. And in fact, maybe it'll be my last video if I get banned for it. but I'm going to talk about it nonetheless. This is the one that you want to tune into. The one that you know you're going to get the statistical truth, the plain facts, and no garbage. On Sunday, we're going to be talking about race and anthropology. And that's going to be a big one. That's going to trigger many people, especially with the facts that I'm going to present. If you're sick and tired of the bullshit when it comes to what the media tells you about race, well, you're going to have to tune in on Sunday, because I can assure you I'm going to blow you away with the facts. You're going to walk away from this knowing things that most people don't, but more importantly, with the knowledge and tools necessary to confront anybody that attempts to argue with you with overwhelming information to not only prove them wrong, but to prove them invalid of their opinion. Because remember, you might have a right to an opinion, but even opinions can be wrong. And there's nothing wrong with calling out a wrong opinion. Prepare to be triggered, snowflakes. Sunday is the show you want to tune into. But tomorrow, I'm going to present a lot of information on intelligence, reason, and logic, and how to argue against leftist liberal morons, and how to present them with facts. So be sure to tune in, because the next couple of days are going to be a roller coaster. Thanks again for tuning in here on The Dark Show. I am Devious Dave Rose. And as always, keep your eyes to the sky. I'll see you next time.